2023 has been filled with ups and downs and everything in between, from crime and violence to economic successes. Today, we make a final assessment as it relates to how it has been in real terms. For this segment of the conversation, I'll be speaking with George Overton and Mitri Siaga. For the conversation, I am Kwame Thomas. Welcome. Gentlemen, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having us.
So, we're looking at the year in review. And the first question I want to throw out is, what are your respective assessments of the government in terms of crime and violence and the management thereof, as well as economics? So,
which one you want to go first?
I'll ask you because we started having the conversation before.
Okay. On the crime and violence situation, the government has made significant investments in the security forces, which has certainly increased their capabilities, be it with vehicles, motorcycles, the training that they have had, the technology that has been implemented. There have been significant strides in the work of the law enforcement agencies. With that, we have seen some reduction in all crimes, but the one that we are all focused on as a nation is homicides. And yes, we have had marginal reductions in homicides. And the concern with homicides is that it is predominantly gang on gang. And therefore, it is telling us that we're really not getting a grip on the gang situation. But, you know, the legislative side of things, we are making progress in the amendments and updating of the legislations to deal with crime and violence. As I've discussed with you earlier, I have a concern that we are now amending laws to require mandatory sentencing, custodial sentencing, and longer sentencing terms. And we are not focused on what is happening because we have high recidivism in our prisons already, so that the return offenders are there. We have no rehabilitation in there. We're now going to put more people in prison for longer terms, and we're really not talking about enhancing. We have 2 overcrowded prisons right now.
So what you seem to be saying, though, is that, so yes, we're doing a lot of capacity building as far as the JCF is concerned. However, you stated earlier that the crime situation is predominantly between gangs.
Correct.
It therefore means that there's something attractive about the gangs and the lifestyles thereof. So it's a social issue now, it's not just a crime issue.
It's both. It's a social issue for the medium to long term. The crime issue, what is it that attracts these gang members? And you touched on one a while ago, the lifestyle. That flamboyant, party-hearty accumulation of assets, having a good time, and really there is no consequence to the commission of crime and the ability to enjoy the proceeds of crime.
So you're saying that crime pays,
correct,
and clearly someone is benefiting.
Correct.
So what can the government, or what should the government be doing that they are not doing to fix that issue?
We have not gone aggressively at the proceeds of crime. And one of the legislative amendments that we have asked for in the national consensus is the introduction of the unexplained wealth order, which changes the traditional position we have had. All our laws require that the government has to prove how you got your wealth so that they can tax it or accuse you of illegal activity. The unexplained wealth order changes the position that it is now you. When the government puts the facts that you have not paid 1 cent of tax in your life, but you have accumulated this kind of wealth, explain how you have accumulated it. It changes the table, and therefore that illicit money is brought to book, that illicit activity and person is brought to book very quickly.
How would that be different, though, in terms of we have the proceeds of crime, or the proceeds from crime?
Government has to prove it, that you committed a crime to earn that wealth.
So
right?
It shifts the onus.
Yeah, it shifts the
shifts the onus from the government having, and you know, one of the basic tenets of justice is you're innocent until proven guilty. What this does is it changes the paradigm. If the government can prove that you have all of these assets accumulated and you have not worked to pay for them or earned the money legally, then you have to prove otherwise. So you're guilty in that case until proven innocent.
So wouldn't a simple credit report be able to assist in
There's
improving those
nothing
things?
that enforces it, and that's why the legislative change is required to allow the authorities to take the legal action against those offending persons.
So they know, but they can't prosecute.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you said something earlier. You said you're guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah.
Because we have to now be careful in terms of how we nuance the legislation, because we don't want to make we don't want to make an enemy or a guilty party out of someone who is not guilty. It's just a case whereby he or she has not been able to, or has not come forward and said, this is how I've accumulated this wealth. So how do we put balance to that?
And the legislative framework is there. There are other jurisdictions within the Commonwealth and around us that have similar legislations. And it is to learn how you do those things without, as you say, turning the innocent into to a criminal. But the truth is that you have to go forward with facts. You have to say, if you have accumulated millions of assets, but the register shows that you have not paid 1 cent in tax, how did this happen?
And you'd have to prove it at that point.
You now have to prove it. But the onus is now on you to prove it. It's not that you're going to say that everybody is a criminal. Come and prove how you got your money. But when one on one can't add up to 2, then you have to come and explain.
Wow. So before you answer the first question that was thrown to you, I want to find out, because clearly we stated that crime pays, but it's expensive as well. What are some of the economic implications that we're more likely to come under as far as proceeds from crimes are concerned, this unexplained amount of money in the economy? What are some of the implications that you can foresee?
Well, there are good and there are bad implications. You know, so the money from crime goes into the economy and it helps to create a larger economy. And if that goes away, then it shrinks the economy somewhat. But we have to decide if we want an economy built on the sand foundation of crime, or if we want an economy built on the cement foundation of business, or of legitimate business. And as a country, we have to decide that. And as George just said, that's going to be a decision that the government is going to have to take at some stage. So the government has approached it from the point of view that they're going to invest money, invest in training, invest in people. And that process has started. The government has put more money this financial cycle into crime and violence, into the Ministry of National Security than ever before by a significant margin. So that's a good thing. That's an important thing. But we have to be careful that we don't expect to fix a decades-old problem in months. You're just not going to turn a switch and crime is going to stop. You're not going to turn a switch and change people's social perception. So it's going to take time. It's a process. I think it's important to note that the last count that I heard, murder is down by 8% year over year. That's a very big deal to me. When you're a country that has over 1,500 murders and you're down by 8%, that's 120 or so people less that were murdered in our country. That's important. That's 120 families that have not been uprooted. That's 120 breadwinners that were not taken out of society. It's important, and we have to get granular with the numbers and realize that every time we talk about a person being murdered, it's a life. It's important. It's the ultimate sacrifice.
So I hear the 8%, and we know that it's 120. Is it a case whereby the government then is not doing enough to move it from that? Because in some of our heads, that sounds like, because if all 120 or even at 10% of that 120 is from one community, one village, one town, one parish, that is still a lot.
So listen, we are never doing enough. No government is ever doing enough once there is one murder in our country. Okay? I think we have to start with that premise. There is no level of murder that is acceptable. But that's not practical. Right? What is happening now is, in international terms, we're at war.
Undeclared war.
Undeclared war. And we have to take it that seriously. Mm-hmm. So, as I said, the government has made its position clear. They are going to spend the money and spend the time on it. And they have started. They are moving in the right direction.
Correct.
We now have to make sure that we hold their feet to the fire to stay that course. We have to hold anybody else that gets the reins of government. We have to hold their feet to the fire that they stay that course. So this has to be a long-term solution. We have to change people's minds, we have to change their perception, and we have to put the resources in place to help to do that.
And the truth is that if we are able to eliminate the gang-on-gang homicides, our murder rate would be at a regional level, the same as countries around us per 100,000. But we just can't get between the gangs.
All right, so 1 second. We're going to our first break. You're watching The Conversation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. I'm Kwame Thomas, and we're here with George Overton, the chair of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica's National Security and Justice Committee, and Mitri Siaga, president of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. Let's get back into the conversation. Just before we went to the break, you stated that we needed to hold the government's foot to the flame. Your portfolio speaks to me about CMAC. That's immediately what came to mind as soon as you started saying that. And how do we know that CMAC is not just another policy oversight committee that's just there to talk about policy and not get the real things done?
All right. There were, in the national consensus on crime, there were some 36 items that had been identified by the stakeholder groups as essential to bringing the whole matter of crime and violence under control. The CMAC was basically established to monitor the government's progress and general progress of those 36 items in the consensus. To do that, you have to have the public's buy-in to the program. That you have to be there, and you saw it with the economic oversight, EPOC. You saw all of these things where they were in the media on a quarterly basis. They had their full reports. Unfortunately, the CMAC never got the funding to be able to create that public relations campaign to get an all Jamaica buy-in, so that when the chairman speaks and says, listen, of the 34 or 36 items on the agenda, there are 16 in progress. They have timelines. Of the 16 that are in progress, 8 of the timelines have been missed. There's nothing that has informed the Jamaican public the way that it ought to have been, that this is the progress or lack thereof that was being made. So yes, you are right. It came across as another policy document instead of something that was connecting the dots, because all of these 36 items were part of connecting the dots towards dealing with crime and violence.
So from my understanding, though, of CMOC's role, and in terms of monitoring, because we understand in terms of policy, what is measured is what is done. So if you don't expect it, or if you don't inspect it, you can't expect it. So my sources have said something to the effect of 50% of what was outlined to be accomplished. Those have been or are being accomplished. So it means that the government is, 50% as good as they had promised. Now, if we're not noising that abroad, I am seeing now that there are inherent risks. The politicization of all of those things. So the work of CMAC risks becoming
but
politics.
I want you to understand that only 50% of them have been done. But it is not it's not a situation where something is done today and that's it.
Yeah.
There are processes and things have started. So we have used, in CMAC, we have used the stoplight method with red, green, and yellow. There are many items that are on yellow, many items on red, on green, as you said, that 50% are done. But it's not that they're either done or not done.
Yep.
We have a lot of items in the yellow which are in progress that are being done.
Right.
And listen, with the other oversight committees, we had the IMF, we had external people holding us accountable.
Right.
With CMAC, we don't. We, the private sector, and the people of Jamaica are holding the government to account. But to say that we have only done half, and because of that we have failed, is not a fair statement. What is a fair statement is that we have done half, we are in the process of doing the other half, and during that time, the things we have done have brought crime down by 8%.
Homicides
brought homicides down by 8%.
Mm-hmm.
We are on the right trajectory. We have to make sure that we don't stop that trajectory, because a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. We have started that first step, but we're on a long journey. So whereas the economic situation could have been fixed over a period of, say, 18 to 24 months, the crime situation may take longer, will take longer.
So where both of you, from the vantage point that both of you would have, do you think that we're doing enough? And when I say that now, I'm asking about the political will, because here we have CMAC that's supposed to be holding the government accountable, and John Public is supposed to be doing that too, but you find somehow there's a wedge in between CMAC and John Public, because CMAC doesn't have all the resources that it needs to inform John Public, and John Public therefore cannot hold the government accountable. Isn't this self-sabotage?
I don't think so. The ultimate way that people hold governments accountable is at the polls. And we will see what we see when that happens. In the interim, it is organizations like ours, the private sector organization of Jamaica, that represents the business community, which represents the workers, the hundreds of thousands of workers that are working in those institutions. It is our responsibility to hold their feet to the fire. And we're so doing. Every opportunity we get, we sit with the government and we make sure that they are sticking to the plans that we have spoken about. Yep. Now, are they happening fast enough for our liking? The answer is no. But government is a very slow-moving ship. Take a long time to turn. It's not very agile. So passing legislation is one of the key elements that has taken an inordinate amount of time. Yep. And we need to get legislation passed faster in Jamaica. Important legislation. Yep. There are thousands, literally thousands of unpassed bills that need the work of the government to bring them to the fore and get them passed to be able to do what we need to do.
Any idea as to what would be some of those, I'm going to call them policy, legacy policies? You have any idea you could share which one are a few of those that are definitely in need of being passed, and they're still there just sitting down in language?
Well, for us in dealing with the matter of crime and violence, it certainly would be the unexplained wealth order is next on the list of legislative items to be done, which is actually now behind time. Some work has been done on it, but it's behind time and it has not been brought to Parliament for discussion or debate, or even, I don't even think a paper has been created to be circulated.
So CEEN, as good as that may be, though, it sounds as though, from what I've heard from both of you and from what I've seen, that we might only be addressing the symptoms as opposed to the causes, because, all right, fine, I commit a crime or I am seen as guilty until proven otherwise. How does that prevent someone else? Because when I'm taken away because of my inability to prove that, you know, I have generated this wealth or accumulated this wealth legitimately, how does that cause someone else to think twice before entering into this, when all we have is an overcrowded prison, no rehabilitation system, no social programs in place? How do we do that?
Well, those things that you just mentioned is also a matter of, do those people have any other hope?
Correct.
And if you don't create that hope for them, then you're on a treadmill. So what we have to do is that there has to be the deterrence component, that by way of what your laws do and how you enforce your laws, there is a consequence, there is a deterrent or a consequence. That consequence is how it is implemented, how it is treated. Because one of the dangers we run is that if you create laws that you can't enforce and don't enforce because of other surrounding situations, then it makes a mockery of your other laws. I said, small things become big things. We turned a blind eye to small elements of our law and order process, and those small things became big things, and that's where we are today.
So both of you can appreciate the statement that rules without relationship causes rebellion. And in our case now, we're looking at rules without enforcement, one, rule without the requisite social programs, because I think that the social programs will act as a deterrent. How can we then fix that from an economic standpoint? How can we show persons that there is hope outside of crime?
Listen, the first way you do that is by creating the opportunities in the economy. And our economy, our macroeconomy, has never been better. That goes without saying. We are the poster child of the region when it comes to our macroeconomy. What has not happened is that has not filtered down into the man on the street as yet. Now, when we speak to the Ministry of Finance and the Minister of Finance, he says there is a lag. It takes some time. And the government will boast that there is 4.5%, which is nearly full employment, 4.5% unemployment rate, which is basically effectively full employment in the country. Now, there are people that challenge that number, but that's how we have measured unemployment forever. So as far as I'm concerned, it's what we have to use. So if there are opportunities, if there are investments in the country and opportunities for people to get effective, good, well-paying jobs that gives them a future and gives them, as George just said, hope, then I think we can start to encourage people out of a life of crime and into a life of gainful employment, legal employment, and be able to get to live their lives in peace and harmony.
All right, so as we conclude this segment, quickly now, is Jamaica the place to live, work, do business, raise family?
For me it is, and I hope and I pray that everybody that has had the opportunity to be born in Jamaica, like we all have, understands the blessing that we have. We live in the greatest country in the world. We have natural, sorry to elaborate, but we have natural beauty. We have the greatest people in the world. I will put a Jamaican against anybody in my workforce, against anybody anywhere in the world, if they are equally compensated and if they are equally trained. So we have good people, we have kind people, we have, and do we have vicious murderers? Of course we do. And we have those anomalies. But we live in the greatest country on earth. Don't forget that.
Yep. All right, with that, I just want to thank you for the contribution as we go to our break. You're watching The Conversation. I'm Kwame Thomas. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. We're now joined by Robert Miller, who is a Member of Parliament for South East St. Catherine, and Damien Gordon, Assistant Lecturer at the University of the West Indies and political commentator. Thanks for staying with us. Gentlemen, welcome to The Conversation.
Thanks for having us.
So, as we start, I don't want to get the objective voice first. I want to hear from the man who is actually in the middle of the pickle. How would you describe the government's role, or how well have they been doing in terms of management of the economy, management generally of the country?
Well, if you really look at it, the economy is doing well. We have the record lowest ever in unemployment, even among youth in Jamaica. When you really look at it as well, the economy has been growing. It has been great in terms of post-COVID-19. The tourism arrival to our shores are exceptionally great. In the Ministry of Finance as well, just to the National Reserve, and just last week it was announced in terms of the surplus in our GDP in terms of export and import deficit has been eradicated, and the country is doing a phenomenal job in my view. I know for a fact that there is an issue with the crime and violence in our society, Jamaica, because one death is one too much. But as you know, that the government has been spending resources in terms of retrofitting the JCF, in terms of technology, capacity building, human resources, building out the police stations worldwide and the capacity of the JCF. But and even recently, in terms of capturing of persons of interest to the JCF for certain crimes, you know, the investigative unit of the JCF has improved a lot, and there's more that needs to be done. But when you look at crime and violence is a everybody issue, not just the government of Jamaica. So it's going to take everybody in Jamaica to really assist and detain this monster of crime once and for all.
So, what's your assessment, Damien?
My assessment, if you were to analyze the performance of the key macroeconomic indicators, debt to GDP, among others, it would appear that the country has achieved a high degree of macroeconomic stability over the last several decades. But as a political scientist...
You said appear, though.
Yes, it would appear based on an analysis of the macroeconomic data or indicators. They're pointed into the right direction, suggesting that the country has been able to achieve macroeconomic stability. However, as a political scientist, we have to draw the distinction between the macro, which is the big picture, and the micro, which is the small picture. Because we find oftentimes that the aggregate, the big picture, does not necessarily translate into benefits or tangible results or improvements
so in other
at
words,
the micro level.
The common man might not be benefiting.
Yes, because what we have in Jamaica is a structure that is based on a high degree of inequality, where there is a concentration of wealth and profit and access to resources at the top, while the vast majority of Jamaicans are subsisting, or they're barely surviving above the minimum level. So you find that even though GDP has increased in the sense that there's a greater degree of productivity generally, more businesses are earning greater levels of revenues, you find that that does not automatically translate into higher salaries and increased benefits for average members of the labor force. And that is where the disconnect emanates. So while you may have these indicators suggesting that the country is doing very well, we're producing more, we're exporting more, it begs the question, are average members of the labor force in Jamaica feeling the benefits of improved economic performance? And we can use the findings of the polls to kind of measure whether or not our average Jamaicans believe that they are feeling the effects of macroeconomic growth. A significant number of Jamaicans have indicated that they believe that the country is heading in the wrong direction. And we ask them why. They present a number of reasons, inclusive of the security issue, inclusive of the economy, inclusive of corruption, among other factors. So the point I'm trying to make is that we need a growth model that allows average people to be able to partake and enjoy macroeconomic growth. It's something that's supposed to trickle down and translate into better standard of living and better salaries. We are still having this issue about livable incomes, where income levels have not kept up pace with the rate of inflation, and we are still having this conversation about what should be a livable income in our type of economy. So we have to address that disconnect.
So
yes.
Mr. MP, what would you have to say based on what was just communicated to us by the economist, by the political commentator?
So I know Damien for quite some time, and
I know
where his leanings are. The reality is he's correct. In my personal view, I've not seen where the macro economics are trickling down to the micro, to the small man on the ground. You know, I know the government has increased the minimum wage.
How else can we bridge that gap, though?
No, that's what I'm getting to. I know the government has increased the minimum wage. Is it enough? It has been the best it has been since any administration in Jamaica. Is it enough? No, it's not, right? But I know the government is really looking at ways in which they can improve the standard of living for each Jamaican in our society. The issue also in terms of new investment, new labor. The Prime Minister, when he went to Trelawney to open the refurbished Royalton destination, he alluded to the fact as well that the investors have to come with creative ways in which they must improve the salary conditions of each citizen that work within their properties. That is something that the government is pushing. As you know, that recently the government of Jamaica started the pension plan for each hotel worker now, so they can benefit from that pension plan. I know for a fact as well recently that the rationalization of the public service in terms of salaries, as Damien articulated as well. But to date, the private sector has not moved with that alacrity to improve salaries as well. So the government started by playing their part in improving the public sector salary. There's a far way to go, of course, without a shadow of a doubt, but at least something has started, and we have started to deal with that issue.
All right, so what you had said earlier when you just started answering the first question was about employment being the lowest it has been in decades. But what I heard from the last meeting, I think is the general meeting for the People's National Party, where the opposition leader was saying that Jamaica, yes, it's the lowest that it has been in terms of unemployment, but what you have low-skilled, low-tech, and that will automatically translate to low wage. How can the government reasonably seek to pivot and correct that? Because we're hearing that the government is not agile enough.
I don't believe in that, and Damien can advise you as well, because when you have persons searching for jobs and there's no person to take up the job, then it would have to increase the salary to attract persons to come to work with your organization. But separate and apart from that, what the government is embarking on is to upskill individuals. That's why the LIFT program came in, for those persons who are unattached, not doing anything, working somewhere, raising a revenue, having investment and savings so they can do their tertiary education. Revamp of Heart Trust NTA to skill persons to allow them to be retrofit to work in the society. What the private sector is pushing is for us to import human resources. But we have the capacity here. We have human resources to date to offset some of the jobs. We have to find a way to get them incorporated, get them into the system, to train them and to retool them for the jobs that are available.
So it's not an issue of us being low-skilled and low-tech. That's not the issue.
In my experience, and I'm a trained teacher by profession, right? In my constituency, what I've seen in my constituency is that I'll take heart to the guys on the corner. I'll put something in there personally. I'll give you a stipend to go and learn a skill. I will give you lunch every day that you attend classes. They sign up and they just don't go. So persons are not, some of the persons that I'm in contact with, they are not really interested in the formal system. And that's just a reality. But we have persons here who are willing to be incorporated in the system.
What would you say to the statements that he has made, as well as a question that was asked?
Yeah, so I think a part of the issue is not the lack of skill or lack of education. Certainly, based on the HDI, the Human Development Index, Jamaica enjoys a high rate of human development, as measured by, for example, access to knowledge and education. So that has certainly not been the issue per se. The issue per se is that we operate within the context of a low-wage economy, where even when you're high-skilled, you're educated at, you're at the master level, etc., you have upskilled yourself, you still are not able to attract a salary that is commensurate to your level of qualification.
So you're saying
Yes.
that the opposition leader's statement is incorrect, or it's not founded upon fact?
Yeah. I'm just saying that I agree that most of the jobs that are being created are really low-skill jobs, and low-skill jobs by definition attract low wages. But generally speaking, we operate within the context of a low-wage economy, where even people who are skilled and educated are not able to command salaries that are commensurate to their level of education. And that is why, for example, you have a significant number of nurses and doctors and teachers, other professionals, are leaving to go to the US and other places where they can command salaries that are commensurate to their level of qualification. So the issue is that while it is good that we are focused on upskilling our young men and our population, we have to ensure that we consider the salary levels that will be able to retain our skill and our talent locally. And a part of the issue is that's where the disconnect lies, where we invest, for example, in building schools and building training centers and institutions. But at the end of the day, when these individuals are finished and they have their certificates and their degrees and their other forms of qualifications and they enter into the world of work, the salaries that are being offered are not attractive. So they're not able to make ends meet. The salaries don't allow them to be able to acquire real estate, homes, save some money, have insurance policies, so they still are struggling. So that is why we have this classification that is called the working poor, where individuals are working 9 to 5, they're working very hard. They can't take a vacation, they don't have life insurance, they can't afford a house, they're still living from paycheck to paycheck. Many of them are heavily indebted. Servicing student loans, mortgage, car loans, and other forms of loan. It's just that we operate within the context of a low-wage economy. And therefore, it is imperative now that the government considers what can we agree, can we come to an agreement between the government and the private sector and the academia as what could constitute a livable income in the Jamaican society. We can't just be pulling a income out of a hat and say, okay, this is national minimum wage. It must be realistic. There must be a rational calculation that, for example, estimates what is required for average Jamaican to live comfortably per week in the Jamaican economy. So we have to think about how we calculate or arrive at a livable income. And a livable income considers an income that allows individuals to be able to take care of their needs, their material needs, their utilities, etc. But at the same time, they should be able to save something aside for the rainy days and invest elsewhere and invest too. We have to, that is what we need to do. So we have to address the issue of the low wage nature of our economy, because we're talking about being able to retain our skills, our brightest minds and our most talented. We have been struggling to do that. They're leaving, and a part of the reason why they're leaving has to do with the fact that they're unable to attract the kinds of incomes and they would have made significant investments in their education and themselves, and they're not able to attract the income that will allow them to live comfortably in the Jamaican economy. We have to address that.
All right. And with that, we go for our break. You're watching The Conversation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. Just before the break, Mr. Gordon spoke about the government and all that the government seemingly they aren't doing. My question to you now, as a sitting member of parliament, is it a case whereby the government is not doing enough consultation? They're not bringing enough stakeholders to the table so that we can have a more rounded or systematic approach to the issues that confront us?
I don't think Sir Gordon is saying that the government is not doing. He's just analyzing.
I'm not saying that they're not doing enough, perhaps.
No, hear what I'm saying. I don't think Mr. Gordon is saying that the government is not doing. What Mr. Gordon is just giving his worldview as to what he believes should happen in terms of Jamaica being a low-income society, which is a fact. He articulated as well that the nurses and the teachers migrate to greener pastures, so to speak, which has always been the case. I'm a trained teacher by profession, as stated earlier. Right, and teachers always leave to what perceived to be.
Never been tempted to?
No, I've never been tempted to.
Let's check
right, because when you calculate it, for example, and I'll answer your question shortly. When a teacher leaves to Florida, for example, which is one of the lowest paying states, but average you'll earn 4,000 US a month. When you calculate that 4,000 US, that's exactly what a teacher is earning now in Jamaica with the new classification, right? So when you take out 1.5 for rent, when you take out an next 500 for bills, when you take out a car payment, when you take out an insurance payment, when you take out grocery, you genuinely don't have any, you're working poor, right? My wife is a nurse. Back then, nurses are better paid over there, and still is. But the salary now in the government sector for nurses is far better than what it was. So nurses are really seeing their way with a new classification. So I'm in agreement with my colleague, Gordon, in terms of, you know, we need to do more about the income and salaries for our residents, our citizens, because the private sectors, they are making huge profits. You know, I want to ensure that that profit is shared among the people. But to answer your question now, I think that the government is doing a lot in terms of consultation. We have had more joint select committee more than ever to ask citizens what's their view, more town hall meetings to have people having a say into the negotiation in terms of salary. We couldn't incorporate anybody in that because a personal negotiation with the unions, like the JT and the Nursing Association, etc. But in majority of everything that we do as a government, we consult with the people.
So you think that the consultation, the level of consultation is sufficient? That's what you're saying?
I believe it is. However, the citizens talk, but they don't come or give their input to the consultation.
And that may be because they feel as though the government talks, but they're not acting in their best interest.
But they have a track record to show that the government of Jamaica, the Andrew Holness-led administration, has not only talked, but has placed action where the utterances are.
So with that plug in mind, you know, that was a good plug. What I want to find out, February is coming. A local government election is constitutionally due. How prepared is your party to retain the 9 of the 14 that they have and to gain more if possible?
I strongly believe that Jamaica will be surprised. I am all confident that we will retain what we have plus more. We are well oiled. I'm sure you would have known that for quite some time the opposition, they have been calling for an election. I've been very vocal on the field, telling them be very careful what they ask for, especially in the constituency that I represent. I have 5 divisions, 4 currently run by the People's National Party and one by the Jamaica Labour Party. But I am confident that when the local government election is called, that I will retain all 5 divisions, plus the mayoral position of Portmore. Because the reality is the voting populace has evolved. You know, it's not as before when persons stick to party line. So general election is different from local government election in the sense that the general election people tend to stick party lines and people come out to vote. Local government people stay away, but they're not really sticking to party lines. My spirit take him, so I'm going to vote for him. Him live with it, so I'm going to vote for him.
So you have more persons now with the spirit tech than you had last
That's
election?
over the years with my research that I've done personally,
Okay.
over the years with a local government election.
What would you say to his claims? How truthful?
So I don't expect the turnout to be high. Historically, the turnout for the local government elections are typically turnout levels for local government elections are typically lower than turnout levels for general elections for a number of factors. One has to do with the phenomenon of voter fatigue or voting fatigue, where especially when the local government election is called close to the general, persons don't like the idea of participating in 2 election exercises in a short period of time. An election exercise can be tedious, it can be time consuming, especially if your vote is in one area and you live in another area. It requires you traveling to and from geographical areas to cast your vote, to join a line, etc. So voter fatigue may be one factor. The fact that, you know, the general election will be called soon. It's due 2025. And if a local is called next year, many persons don't place that high value on the local government election, and they don't see the urgency of participating in a local government election in 2024 when a general will be called in 2025. And especially given the context that many average Jamaicans are not able to distinguish between the roles of councillors and those of members of parliament. That's one of the reasons why the MP is a go-to for everything related to the communities in the constituencies, because everything that is supposed to be done and is not done, the MP is expected to fill that gap, and MP is that go-to person, because people don't understand what are the specific roles and functions of the local authorities and the municipalities, and what are the roles and functions of central government. And because of that, the kind of value that ought to be placed on local governance by communities is not really placed on local government. So let me answer the question of how the election will go. I am less concerned about who will win and who will lose. I am more concerned about how local government is treated, and not just by this current government, but by governments historically. The seriousness that is supposed to be ascribed to local government has not been ascribed to local government by either of the 2 political parties. And that is reflected, for example, in how often local government elections are cancelled. The representatives who have the most direct line of communication with communities that are responding to community needs on a daily basis are really the local authorities. Many of them actually live in the communities, in contrast to some MPs who do not live in their constituencies. So in terms of who the citizens can go to resolve their issues on a day-to-day basis, it is really the local authorities. They are responsible for maintaining drains. They're responsible for maintaining debushing. They're responsible for garbage collection, the maintenance of street lights, markets, etc. So the reality is that I am more concerned about how we have historically treated local government. We need to devolve more power and authority to local governments that can be more effective and responsive to the needs of people at the community level. And we must have a certain level of we must enshrine local government to ensure that, you know, this important representational issue of local governance is not postponed or is treated as something frivolous by the central government. Yes, so that is my broader issue. The general treatment of local government as something that is not significant, despite it being the more direct line of governance that respond to the needs of communities on a day-to-day basis.
So I'm going off the assumption that these are factual statements. I believe them to be so. How can this government take the necessary steps to ensure that what he's stating, this malady that he has just described, is not repeated going forward? Because we have had, what, 1, 2, 3 cancellations or postponements? How can we prevent, how can the party, the ruling government, prevent that? No. What kind of legislation do you plan to put in place?
So I know there are certain legislation that is coming to Parliament soon. I can't speak much of it. I know it's being discussed currently now at Cabinet. And once it's discussed at Cabinet, then it will come to the Parliament. Then we will be briefed on it. But sufficing to say as well that in a majority of what Damien has said, I'm in full agreement with. But just to add to it as well, that since the importance that this administration has placed on local government, in the sense that Minister Mackenzie, since taking on the role as Minister of Local Government, has implemented that each elected councillor must have an office that is paid for, and also they must have a secretary that is paid for by the state as well. Now, there's an avenue where people can go and speak to their elected representative. As Member of Parliament, I have my office. You know, my constituency days on a Thursday. I'm here doing this interview while my constituents are waiting on me over Portmore, right? So there are avenues in which, you know, importance are placed on the local authority to ensure that they give the true representation that they deserve. But you find in some situation, especially in my constituency, that the councillors will tell the constituents that they don't get funding, you know, to do this when it's their responsibility. And the reality is it all depends on the individual and the representation that they take to the people. That will make the difference.
So you're saying that it's not so much of an issue or a need to give more power, one, and give more deference to local government individuals, but it's more for them to be more proactive.
Absolutely, because, for example, and I must say, the power that a local authority has. So me, for an example, as a councillor, Damien articulated the role of a councillor in the local authority, right? If I'm to do any debushing, if I'm to use a community center in my constituency, I have to write to the municipal council through the councillor, seeking permission to use that.
They wouldn't stop you.
They have always done. I have letters to prove that. They have always done. If one of my constituents want to open a shop, they have to get approval from the local authority. If they want to build on their homes, they have to get approval from the local authority. What the local authority should do, and this is my experience in Portmore, is to enforce the laws that are there, because you're still finding persons selling in areas that they're not supposed to sell. You're still finding the mechanic shops in areas that they're not supposed to be. You're still finding persons doing stuff that they're not supposed to do. The enforcement of the local authority is very important. So the Christmas mitigation that we got as members of Parliament, right? I had to write to the municipal council to advise them that I will be doing this area, I'll be doing that area. Then they will respond to me, do not do here because the councillor is doing here, but you can go ahead and do here. I have to get permission from them.
So we typically see the member of parliament, or members of parliament rather, as the CEO for their particular area, and the councillors would be the managers. And you're saying that it's not necessarily so, it's a little bit more ad hoc than that. And
it's a little bit more than that, because at the end of the day, everybody's going to call a member of parliament. And Damien alluded to it as well. They are not thinking about the councillors, their role and responsibility.
Perhaps because they don't know.
Many persons believe also that the member of parliament gives the councillor resources, but the councillors get their resources from the Ministry of Local, their own resources. We get ours from the council fund that is managed. Also, in terms of the issue of persons living in their division, they have a close connect with those persons. We had a town hall meeting as well, where doing now in Parliament, the job descriptions of members of Parliament, right? That's a joint select committee, which there were many town hall meetings. One was in Wolmer's Boys. The community, in terms of Jamaica and all, was invited. How many persons came?
How publicized was it?
It was very publicized.
You can remember hearing about that?
I mean, I am.
Don't want to put you on the spot.
So because in my profession, I am obligated to kind of know these things. I'm not sure to what extent average Jamaicans consume traditional media. I'm not sure what were the avenues of advertising, but I know that the events, the town hall meetings were not well attended. I'm not sure if it has to do with the fact that oftentimes citizens feel like their voices and their input will not make a difference. And I think that is something you have said. A lot of persons believe that their involvement in these activities will not genuinely lead to any form of change or transformation. Change. So it's just a general level of disinterestedness in politics among Jamaicans.
So it's not just voter apathy. Then.
It's not just voter apathy.
I'd like to add with that.
Yeah.
As a country, are we saying, which I agree, 100%, but the populace has to emancipate themselves. Yeah. So over the years, are we going to say that nothing is being done, so I'm going to shy away from the process? Why not? Just a minute. Yeah. Why not, if Robert Miller is not performing, I'm not going to vote because nothing's going to be done. Vote out Robert Miller. You understand? Play your part. Don't just sit one side and say, listen.
But you see, the issue about voting out, again, the issue is that there is a general lack of confidence and disinterestedness.
They don't feel as though there's a reasonable alternative.
The two political parties, in the sense that people don't believe that one is necessarily better
than the other.
Improvement upon the other. And the rational conclusion that they come to is that we rather not engage in an exercise that is futile or an exercise that they may consider to be wasteful. And this may not be the best way to nurture healthy democracy.
No, I'm with you.
But after years of disenchantment and frustration and having to deal with what they perceive to be the failures of government, reflected, for example, in corruption, crime and violence, and other areas of mismanagement and low wages, people just feel that the system of government does not serve the majority. It may serve a minority, and because of this, they have lost faith. And when the people lose faith, they disconnect. I guess we have to now give the government has to now perform at a level that gives them the reassurance that will now encourage more people to regain that confidence. And when people regain confidence and they're reassured, this will also increase their willingness to participate in many of these
and along
exercises.
With that,
yes,
as a political commentator,
yes,
and as a host, we can't. So maybe we hide beneath the question that people believe. Is it your belief? So we have to educate the people as well, right? Which is extremely important. We can't dwell on the past. So because this used to happen and people believe this, it is a similar way today, right? Which is not fair, because persons must read for themselves as well and analyze for themselves. And both parties are not alike. Contrary to what polls say, I'm a marketer by profession. I know we can tweak polls, and you know that, right? Depending on what polls say. What is on the ground is extremely important. And we have a duty.
Which admittedly can be tweaked as well.
As educated people to educate the populace and encourage everyone to exercise their right, which is extremely important.
Yeah, but
because if you fail to exercise your right,
let me just say that. Let me just clarify that.
If you fail to exercise your right, then you are a part of the problem.
I disagree with Robert on that, because the right is the right to vote or not to vote. We do have a system of mandatory voting where every citizen is compelled to vote. You have the right to deliberate your decision to vote, and you may use many factors or bases to make the determination who to vote for, and the factors may include your assessment of the platform or the the agendas of the candidates or the political parties. You may have a particular hierarchy of needs as an individual. What are the things that matter to you most? And to what extent do the candidates who are offering themselves to office are responsive to those needs or those expectations? And many persons make their votes or make voting decisions based on calculation of the ability of the candidates to meet their needs and their expectations, and where they feel strongly that neither the candidate has articulated a set of ideas, a set of vision that aligns with their expectations and needs, a voter should be able to withhold their choice to vote unless that threshold has been met. So there's no right for you to vote per se. It's a right for you to you have the right to exercise that right to vote. It's not a case where you should vote for voting's sake. Your vote must be contingent upon a rational assessment of the ability, the capacity, the vision, the ideas, the platforms of the candidates. Because again, you don't want to just exercise in the act of voting just for voting's sake. Voting should lead to a positive or transformational outcome at the individual or at the community level.
All right, let me hold you
Yes.
for 1 second. We're going to the break. You're watching The Conversation. We'll be right back. So, no man, that Welcome back to The Conversation. I am Kwame Thomas, and we're here with Bobby Stevens, the co-chairman of the Advocates Network Jamaica. Welcome to The Conversation. How are you?
Good morning, and thank you. I'm good.
So, there are always a lot of things on the table for us to discuss. But one of the things that immediately came to mind was the issue of governance and how good of a job the government is doing in terms of crime management, in terms of corruption management, all those things. What are your assessments on that?
We believe that the government is doing a poor job, and let me explain why. The focus is on crime suppression and on SOEs and, states of emergency, etc., going into communities and trying to contain crime. But some of the root causes of crime are related to much deeper issues, For instance, the whole question of neglect of people in the inner cities, in the squatter communities, in areas where there is limited facilities for playing of children, for development, for jobs, etc. And furthermore, education in those areas is lacking. So it needs a far more serious social as well as political intervention in terms of guiding people and assisting them in coming out of their situations. And I believe that, we believe that this needs to be led by an organization that is going to be focusing on community development as well as housing development. And the major organization that has enough funds to be able to do that is the Housing Trust. So we feel the Housing Trust needs to play a far more critical interventionist role in terms of upgrading as well as developing the needs of the communities in collaboration, of course, with other government agencies and the private sector. And one of the things that was established was a crime monitoring organization and
Crime Consensus Monitoring Oversight Committee,
correct, which was to pull together private sector, government, NGOs, etc. Well, that has not been given as much attention as it needs to be, and it needs to be led by the Prime Minister.
So does that mean then that speaking of CMAC, do you think then that they're not doing as good as a job as they ought to, because they're not as empowered as they ought to be?
Precisely. If you notice, there have been very few major happenings with respect to CMAC because the government has largely ignored it. Recently, there's a new minister who has taken up the IT portfolio, and she has been assigned to get involved with the program. But in my opinion, any dealing with crime and development and all that has got to be led by the Prime Minister.
But given the function, even the very name, Crime Consensus Monitoring Oversight Committee, if that's there to oversight, to provide oversight and to monitor the crime consensus, would it be justified for us to say that the Prime Minister ought to be the one to head that? Because at the end of the day, who would he be accountable to?
Well, recognize this, that crime is one of our major issues that everybody
Yes.
is concerned about. And if you are government, the Prime Minister should be fully behind this and leading it. That is our opinion. And it is really something where he has to endorse and ensure that all of the government agencies are collaborating to ensure that these programs that are agreed on are implemented.
But we get the impression that that's actually being done, in that there were 36 tenets, and approximately a half of those have been, or they're in some level, various levels of completion.
Yeah, but for a long time, nobody was even from the government was paying attention to CMOC and what was happening. And so a lot of the meetings and discussions and all that were taking place without the highest representation from the government. Now, it's important that this organization and this whole movement of trying to address crime in a very holistic way is addressed with far more rigor and far more seriousness in the new year, in our opinion.
Well, you started out by saying that the government is seemingly more inclined to, well, they're on a path of crime suppression,
right,
vis-a-vis crime prevention. And based on what even the other panelists that I've had in the past have stated, they have stated in no uncertain terms that what the government is actually doing is that they're just looking at a part of. So it's piecemeal. One person can be quoted as saying, and they're not even picking the low-hanging fruits. So how can they fix that? What other measures they need to implement to ensure that it's a holistic approach that is made to crime outside of the NHD? Yes, outside of the NHD that you have stated.
Well, all right, let's look at a critical, important element of development, which is education. We went to the expense of having a report done by a group that was led by Orlando Patterson. And that report has been sitting on the table for almost 3 years now. And it has not been presented to Parliament for serious discussion. There is no parliamentary subcommittee. And therefore, there is no serious action plan for the improvement of education. And what we have are piecemeal, again, actions in education. Now, education is important to stress for sustainable development and for crime reduction. And to me, that is a key pillar in terms of our future development. And it needs to be treated where that report is presented to Parliament, discussed, agreed, and a plan come out as to how we are going to correct a lot of the problems. Currently, we're not funding sufficiently the proper development of the education sector, whether it is a training or development of the teachers and the payment of the teachers, or the schools. I mean, I know several schools that their labs are non-existent, you know, where you have a physics, a chemistry, and all that. These are the critical labs if you're talking about science and technology. And we've got to get those right. But I don't get the impression that there's a serious effort to pull together all the forces and make sure that education is right.
So you're saying that education, one, and therefore crime management generally, they are not seen as real priorities of the current government?
No, there may be priorities, but the thing is the strategies that are being adopted are focused more on, you know, kind of pinch hitting here and there rather than a comprehensive approach. And that is what is needed, both for crime and for the whole area of education. Another area that you know, you talk about governance and our image, Jamaica's image worldwide. We recently had some total mess-ups, you want to call it, in terms of our foreign affairs and how foreign affairs is handled. First of all, we had a situation where we decided at the OAS that we were voting against some of the people who supported us during some of our very low times, Venezuela and Cuba in particular. Then came the whole question of how we dealt with the Haitians who came here. We didn't recognize their rights. We didn't recognize the fact that we have signed international agreements that say that, look, we have to give people the right to at least put a case forward for some kind of asylum or whatever, or hear them at any rate. No, they come, they're put on a boat and sent back to Haiti within hours. We also failed to vote when it was a critical vote at the United Nations for there to be a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza conflict. And to me, those things are not things that in the past, certainly, our record has been that we believe in the rights of people. We are one of those who were most vociferous in terms of anti-apartheid movement. And we're moving away from that. We're moving to a point where we're not clear on what our foreign affairs and our foreign affairs positions are, okay? And to me, that is a sign of a breakdown in governance.
So you're pretty much saying that there's a breakdown, there's a full breakdown right across the spectrum of governance that we have here. How can we fix that?
I'll be honest with you. We believe that there needs to be a new constitution, first of all. You know, the government said it's going to move on the constitution very quickly. And it set up this committee and said, look, within 2 months, we're going to have a presentation to Parliament and we're going to rush this thing. We said, hold on. Where are you rushing to? Because you've got to ensure that people are educated about what is in the current constitution, what are the changes you'd like to make, why are these changes necessary. Let us have discussions throughout the country, education throughout the country. Let us bring the people up to speed with what we think are the best elements of a new constitution. That wasn't the approach. The approach was, you know, we're going to do this thing overnight. We're going to get it done, and then, you know, and the main focus was on replacing the king with a local representative that we choose. Now, to me, that's you know, superficial. You need some serious bones to a new constitution. And there are several things that there have been various discussions about.
Such as?
Like, you know, the whole question of fixed dates for elections, term limits, the whole question of why are we still using the Privy Council as our last resort in terms of issues related to judges and so on. You know, we need to look at all these issues. But instead of that, what was happening was that there was this committee that was going to push everything through overnight. We feel there needs to be a serious commitment to public education and to widespread discussion throughout the society of what a new constitution needs to look like.
Would you be able to highlight one good thing that the government is doing?
Oh, clearly there are things that are going right. I mean, as far as the IMF is concerned and as far as most of the foreign agencies that assess our situation are concerned, we're doing extremely well from a financial or a management of our economy perspective, right? That, to a great extent, is something which we have become used to almost, because you remember the days when we had fiscal irresponsibility, where we would spend money that we didn't have. I think that has now been policy across administrations, where we clearly stick with trying to have a surplus in our budget and to ensure that we don't spend more than we earn. So that certainly is something which is excellent that has been continued by the government. I don't think that they're failing in every quarter, but certainly that is something that they're doing positively. But there are areas that we feel with respect to the question of distribution of wealth, for instance. A lot of people are doing extremely well, and a lot of people are satisfied with the way things are going, particularly at a certain level, whether business level or people at a certain echelon in the society. But is poverty going down or is it increasing? And what is happening to the ordinary people out there? Are they feeling the effects of this economic development and positive GDP? Those are questions that we have to have answered, because in our opinion, it is clear that that is not happening.
Well, so you're pretty much saying, so the government is not bad in all its quarters. It's doing some pretty good things. However, there are a lot more that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Jamaica should be much more elevated in terms of our standards, our values, our approach in terms of the whole question of the quality of life of people. We should not be having 900,000 people still living in squatter settlements. What we should be doing is moving those people out of squatter settlements and poverty into being owners of their own properties and people who are taking pride in the development of their communities. In many of these communities, they work, for instance, in the tourism industry. On one side of the street, you have these fabulous resorts. On the other side, you have communities that are neglected. They don't have proper water, proper sewage, proper roads, proper play fields for the children, etc. The funds that we are earning from all of these industries should be feeding the development of our communities, and that is not being shown.
What are your primary expectations for 2024?
Well, certainly I think there has to be a focus on, getting the elections behind us. That's number one. And number two is the whole question of a new constitution where we get certain things right, because I think there are several things that have been hanging in the air. We also need to collaborate a lot more between private sector, government, opposition, and the NGOs to deal with coming up with a plan for addressing crime. And it's not something that is an overnight fix. It is something that's going to have a long period of dedication to interventions in various communities to ensure that we upgrade them and we improve the conditions to the point where people are not attracted to crime, but are more attracted to finding proper jobs, getting properly educated, and moving up in life.
So the social infrastructure needs to be remedied.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Anything else that you could point out?
Well, certainly I think that, when you look, for instance, at some of the issues that have come up with workers' rights in Canada, many of our workers are going off to do work in foreign countries, particularly during the summer, etc. And we need to make sure that they're properly taken care of. We had a report that was done at our instigation, we believe, last year, but it wasn't a fulsome report. And what eventually has happened now is that the situation has arisen again. And we have set up for a meeting with the new minister, because the minister that was there brushed us aside. But I think that what we are looking forward to is having a serious discussion about how we can address the rights of workers, particularly those working in overseas jobs.
All right, in the last few seconds, your assessment of the government's performance. They could do a better job, or?
I think they can do a much better job. Jamaica should be much further ahead in terms of our stature in the world. And there needs to be a lot more focus on dealing with the issues of the least important in the society. In other words, those who are in ghettos and so on, and making sure that they are properly dealt with in terms of improvement of their conditions.
All right, so I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for having given us so comprehensive a report on the conversation. And for you, we just want to wish you all the best for the season, and there you have it, a comprehensive review of the state of our country and their expectations for 2024 and beyond. For the conversation, I am Kwame Thomas. Do have a good one.